Thought Power, Chapter 2, Radioactive Thought. In our consideration of thought power, we are not concerned with the nature of the ultimate character of mind or of spirit in its ultimate essence. Neither are we concerned with the precise nature of the relation between mind or spirit and the physical mechanism through which they or it manifest in the processes of thought. Enough for the purposes of the present consideration is the evident fact that what we know as thought consists of a process or series of processes in which the mechanism of the brain cells and brain substance is involved and employed by the natural energies playing upon it in some way as yet unknown to science. That thought is a process or series of processes in which energy plays upon the physical mechanism of the brain is admitted by the most careful scientific thought of today. The phenomena of thought can be scientifically explained in no other way. Without brain substance and cells, there can be no process of thought such as we know by that term. That energy of some kind is involved in some processes is undoubted by any scientific thinker. Thought is under natural law and order and maintains an orderly trend and sequence in accordance with it. Thought processes may be measured, weighed, and gauged by delicate instruments designed in the modern psychological laboratories. Science is concerned only with the way things act, the laws governing their processes, and the orderly trend manifested in these processes. It does not attempt to go beyond these processes, if it be true science. It does not speculate concerning the ultimate nature of things with first principles or with ultimate realities. It is concerned with the pragmatic idea of how things work and does not invade the field of things in themselves, i.e., things considered apart from their activities and phenomena. The latter class of speculations and inquiries belongs properly to metaphysical and philosophical thought, or is attached to religious faith. In our present inquiry, therefore, you are at liberty to have and to hold your own particular metaphysical, philosophical, or religious views concerning the ultimate nature of mind or spirit, to think of these things as things in themselves, if you so wish. All we ask you to do is consider the processes of thought, i.e., how thought works, as discovered by scientific inquiry and supported by the indisputable facts of the case. You are asked to concede the fact that the brain substance and the brain cells are employed as the mechanism of thought or the instruments of thought. This is asking you merely to admit what you already know to be a fact. You are also asked to regard the thought processes as being set into operation by the presence and power of some form of energy, i.e., by some internal or inherent power, which is capable of acting, operating, or producing effects. This also is self-evident. You are also asked to accept the acknowledged and demonstrated fact that in the processes of thought, there is an expenditure of energy and a consuming or combustion of brain material sufficient at times to increase the temperature of the brain area involved in the process. These are axiomatic truths of physiological psychology, originally arrived at by observation, experiment, and careful tests. So far, you will note, you have been asked to accept merely that which is accepted by ordinary scientific thought and which forms a part of the general knowledge of every person of ordinary education and intelligence. You are now also to be asked to accept, at least tentatively, another truth or statement of facts, which is far from being so well known or accepted by the average person, and which still remains in the category of disputed facts in the realm of scientific thought, but which is fast becoming more widely and generally accepted by scientific minds, and which is receiving almost daily additional supporting and corroborating experimental evidence and proof. We have reference to the statement or assertion that thought is radioactive, i.e., is capable of being radiated over space external to the brain in which it is generated, there to produce effects and to cause results. This statement is supported by the enormous body of evidence concerning the existence of the phenomena of telepathy, thought transference, thought transmission, etc., which has accumulated by reason of the investigations and researches of scientific investigators extending over the period of the past 40 years or more. These discoveries have served to explain and account for much that formerly was classed as supernatural or occult. Such phenomena are now brought under the category of natural law and order. It is scarcely too much to say that 9 out of every 10 persons will be found to have had some personal experience along the general lines of thought transmission, or it is now generally termed telepathy. Many experiences of common occurrence in the life of the average individual can be explained and accounted for only upon the general theory of thought radioactivity, as above defined. In addition to the testimony and general experiences above mentioned, scientific thinkers have demonstrated logically that, theoretically at least, thought radioactivity is quite reasonable and logical and is entitled to a respectful hearing and investigation at the hands of all true scientific persons. In fact, the many recent important discoveries concerning the existence of radioactive powers in various substances and arising from many different forms of natural energy may be said to render it quite reasonable, by analogy, to look for the presence of radioactivity in brain substance, this resulting from mental activity, even in absence of the supporting facts and experiences, and to justify the confident expectation of finding it there, even if it had never before been discovered. Let us quote for your information the statements of 2 eminent scientists serving to demonstrate the scientific reasonableness of the presence and power of radioactivity in the thought process as follows. Sir William Crookes, president of the Royal Society of England, in an address delivered before that society in Bristol, England, as early as the year 1898, long before the general scientific thought had been favorably directed toward the subject, he said, "Were I now introducing for the first time these inquiries to the world of science, I should choose a starting point different from that of old, where we formerly began. It would be well to begin with telepathy, with that fundamental law, as I believe it to be, that thoughts and images may be transferred from one mind to another without the agency of the recognized organs of sense, that knowledge may enter the human mind without being communicated in any hitherto known or recognized ways. If telepathy takes place, we have 2 physical facts: the physical change in the brain of A, the suggester, and the analogous physical change in the brain of B, the recipient of the suggestion. Between these 2 physical events, there must exist a train of physical causes. It is unscientific to call in the aid of mysterious agencies when, with every fresh advance in knowledge, it is shown that ether vibrations have powers and attributes abundantly able to meet any demand, even the transmission of thought. It is supposed by some physiologists that the essential cells of nerves do not actually touch, but are separated by a narrow gap which widens in sleep while it narrows almost to extinction during mental activity. This condition is so singularly like a Branly or Lodge coherer, a device which led to the discovery of wireless telegraphy, as to suggest a further analogy. The structure of brain and nerve being similar, it is conceivable that there may be present masses of such nerve coherers in the brain, whose special function it may be to receive impulses brought from without through the connecting sequence of ether waves of appropriate order of magnitude. Roentgen has familiarized us with an order of vibrations of extreme minuteness as compared with the smallest waves with which we have hitherto been acquainted, and there is no reason to suppose that we have here reached the limit of frequency. It is known that the action of thought is accompanied by certain molecular movements of the brain, and here we have physical vibrations capable from their extreme minuteness of acting direct upon individual molecules, while their rapidity approaches that of internal and external movements of the atoms themselves. A formidable array of phenomena must be scientifically sifted before we eventually grasp a faculty so strange, so bewildering, and for ages so inscrutable as the direct action of mind upon mind. Camille Flammarion, the eminent French scientist, said, "The action of one mind upon another at a distance, the transmission of thought, mental communication at a distance, All these are not more extraordinary than the action of the magnet on iron, the influence of the moon on the sea, the transportation of the human voice by electricity, the revelation of the chemical constituents of a star by the analysis of its light, or indeed all the wonders of contemporary science. What is certain is that telepathy can and ought to be henceforth considered by science as an incontestable reality, that minds are able to act upon each other without the intervention of the senses, that psychic force exists, though its nature is yet unknown. We now call your attention to the following statement of Bain, the eminent authority upon the subject of the relation of mind and body, not only because of its own importance, but also because of its office as an approach to the two several questions immediately following it. Professor Bain said, the structure of the nervous substances and the experiments made upon the nerves and nerve centers establish beyond doubt certain peculiarities as belonging to the force that is exercised by the brain. This force is of a current nature. That is to say, a power generated at one part of the structure is conveying along an intervening substance and discharged at some other part. The different forms of electricity and magnetism have made us familiar with this kind of action. Dr. Frank Channing Haddock says, all states of body and mind involve constant molecular and chemical change. The suggestion arises that the brain, with its millions of cells and its inconceivable changes in substance, may be regarded as a transmitting and receiving battery. The brain being a kind of battery and the nerves conductors of released stored energy to different parts of the body by a kind of action similar to the actions of electricity and magnetism. It is suggested that either by means of the ether or of some still finer form of matter, discharges of brain energy may be conducted beyond the limits of the body. If the nerve tracts correspond to wires, this refined medium may correspond to the ether field supposed to be employed in wireless telegraphy. As electrical movements are conducted without wires or other visible media, so may brain discharges be conveyed beyond the mechanism of the battery, without the intervention of nerves, except as they may constitute a part of the battery. Generally speaking, such discharges would originate in two ways: by direct mental action, or by mental or physical states, perhaps by a combination. Our final quotation, to which the last two preceding quotations logically lead, is from Professor Orkowitz, the eminent psychologist and scientific investigator, who says, every living being is a dynamic focus. A dynamic focus tends ever to propagate the motion that is proper to it. Propagated motion becomes transformed according to the medium it traverses. Motion always tends to propagate itself. Therefore, when we see work of any kind, mechanical, electrical, nervic, or psychic, disappearing without visible effect, then one of two things has occurred: either one, a transmission, or two, a transformation. Where does the first end and where does the second begin? In an individual medium, there is only transmission. In a different medium, there is transformation. You send an electric current through a thick wire. You have the current, but you do not perceive any other force. But cut the thick wire and connect the ends by means of a finer wire. The fine wire will grow hot. There will be a transformation of a part of the current into heat. Take a pretty strong current and interpose a wire still more resistant, or a very thin carbon rod. The carbon will emit light. A part of the current then is transformed into heat and light. The light acts in every direction round about, first visibly as light, then invisibly as heat and electric current. Hold a magnet near it. If the magnet is weak and movable in the form of a magnetic needle, the beam of light will cause it to deviate. If it is strong and immovable, it will in turn cause the beam of light to deviate. All this at a distance, without contact, without special conductors. A process that is at once chemical, physical, and psychical goes on in a brain. A complex action of this kind is propagated through the gray matter, as waves are propagated in water. Regarded on its physiological side, an idea is only a vibration that is propagated, yet which does not pass out of the medium in which it can exist as such. It is propagated as far as other like vibrations allow. It is propagated more widely if it assumes the character which subjectively we call emotive, but it cannot go beyond without being transformed. Nevertheless, like force in general, it cannot remain in isolation. It escapes in disguise. Thought stays at home as the chemical action of a battery remains in the battery. It is represented abroad by its dynamic correlate, called in the case of the battery a current, and in the case of the brain, I know not what. But whatever its name may be, it is the dynamic correlate of thought. I have chosen to use the term dynamic correlate. There is something more than that. The universe is neither void nor dead. A force that is transmitted meets other forces, and if it is transformed only little by little, it usually limits itself to modifying another force at its own cost, though without suffering perceptibly thereby. This is the case particularly with forces that are persistent, concentrated, well seconded by their medium. It is the case with the physiological equilibrium, nervic force, psychic force, ideas, emotions, tendencies. These modify environmental forces without themselves disappearing. They are but imperceptibly transformed, and if the other mind is of a nature exceptionally well adapted to them, they gain in inductive action. We would call your attention to that part of the above quotation in which it is pointed out that the action of the beam of electric light on a weak, movable magnet and the action of a strong and immovable magnet on the beam of electric light is exerted from a distance, without contact, without special conductors. You will note that Professor Okeritz holds that a similar action from a distance, without contact, without special conductors, occurs in the processes of thought transmission or thought radioactivity. He speaks of thought vibrations being but imperceptibly transformed and holds that under certain favorable conditions, they gain in inductive action. We ask you to make a mental note of this term, inductive action, for it serves to indicate the nature of the action of the radioactive thought vibrations, which we are now considering. By inductive action is meant action from a distance, without contact, without special conductors. The term induction, in its usage in connection with the physics, is defined as the property or process by which one body having electrical or magnetic polarity produces it in another body without direct contact. A leading textbook says, if an electrified body is brought near an uncharged one, either conductor or non-conductor, the latter will exhibit electrical forces. It is said to be charged by induction. Similarly, if there is a magnet surrounded by a uniform medium, such as air, and if a body of a different kind of material from the medium is brought near the magnet, it will exhibit magnetic forces and is said to be magnetized by induction. Now, all investigation of the phenomena of thought transmission seems to reveal a condition of affairs which can best be accounted for and explained upon the respective theories of one, the radioactivity of thought, and two, the inductive action of thought. That is to say that one, thought radiates power capable of causing effects and producing results at a distance, and two, thought exerts an inductive action from a distance without contact and without special conductors. It would seem that the process of radioactivity and the power of inductive action, which is admitted to be present in the physical world, has its counterpart or correspondence in the mental world, the same general laws governing each, and a general analogy existing between the two classes of phenomena. While some of the more conservative and orthodox scientists hold that as yet the hypothesis of thought radioactivity and thought inductive action, respectively, have not been sufficiently proved to raise the hypothesis into the category of natural laws, yet the mass of supporting evidence and the reasoning based upon the same is sufficiently strong to justify the careful scientific thinker in accepting these two hypotheses, at least tentatively, as working hypotheses, by means of which thought along these lines and further experimental work are rendered easier. Certainly no one thoroughly acquainted with the facts of the case, with the phenomena of thought transmission, will deny that thought acts as if it were radioactive and capable of exerting inductive action. In the absence of better hypothesis, at least we are justified in adopting the two just mentioned as working hypotheses for convenience of thought on the subject and as an aid in further investigations. Accordingly, in this book, we shall assume as working hypothesis the radioactivity of thought and the inductive action of thought, respectively. Let us now proceed to a consideration of the observed phenomena of thought power, in which the radioactivity of thought and the inductive action of thought are held to be manifested.